Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the launch of the 1 in 4 annual report for 2020. My name is David Holohan, and I'm the chairperson of the board of 1 in 4, and I'm delighted so many stakeholders have taken the time to attend today. I'm joined by Maeve Lewis, Chief Executive of 1 in 4, and by Dr. Niall Muldoon, Ombudsman for Children. Dr. Muldoon is a clinical psychologist and has worked in the area of child protection for over 20 years. Before being appointed Ombudsman for Children in 2015, he worked at the OCO as Director of Investigations, and before that was the National Clinical Director of the Carey Foundation. Just before we begin, a small housekeeping matter. If anyone has a question they would like to ask, please feel free to add it to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentations. Looking back, 2020 was a year of continued progress for 1 in 4, but one in which demand for our psychotherapy services continued to exceed our ability to supply them, given our limited resources. While the challenges of adequately resourcing organisations such as 1 in 4 are well known, with society now emerging from COVID conditions, an escalation in demand for mental health services is very likely. And this adds a great impetus to redouble our efforts as a society to adequately fund such important work, given the very negative ramifications if we do not succeed in this regard. Quite simply, failure cannot be an option. To that end, I would like to thank our supporters, the statutory agencies that help fund 1 in 4's work, the HSE, TUSLA, and the Department of Justice in particular, and also corporate and individual donors which continue to support 1 in 4 with regular donations. Your support allows 1 in 4 to make a difference and improve lives across our country. As a board of directors, we continue to operate at a very high level, ensuring that the highest standards in corporate governance and risk management are being met at all times. I would like to extend thanks to my fellow directors for their contribution during the year. And on behalf of the board, I would also like to thank the staff of 1 in 4 for their very hard work during 2020. And I want to draw particular attention to the ongoing professionalism shown during the year while working from home and continuing to provide much needed services in a very challenging environment. These efforts are greatly appreciated both by the board and by the management team of 1 in 4. Thank you all once again for joining us today, and I will hand it over to Maeve Lewis.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. I think it's fair to say that 2020 was the most challenging year we have ever faced in 1 in 4. And perhaps we forget now how frightened and anxious we all were back in March 2020. We've been watching all the terrible events in Italy and in China, and we didn't know what was going to happen. We literally had to close the offices overnight just before Paddy's Day in 2020. And we were left with huge questions, like what's going to happen to our clients, very vulnerable client group? What about the offenders that we're working with? If we can't see them, are they going to relapse and perhaps cause further harm to children? And what about our clients who had court dates coming up in March and April of that year? Happily, we were able to switch online almost overnight. And this had teething problems, both for the staff, because there were issues with people working from home, with broadband, not having proper laptops and so on. But it really worked. And at the end of 2020, we did a survey with all our clients, and they told us things like that the online support, the online therapy was a lifeline, and in some cases, a lifesaver for people. However, there were huge problems as well. We had clients who didn't have the safety or the privacy at home to be able to engage in an online therapy session. We had clients who were doing their sessions on their phone, sitting in their cars in Tesco car park, or sitting on a park bench. And obviously, it's not possible to deal with very complex relational trauma in those type of circumstances. Other clients, their only possibility of staying connected with us was by telephone counselling, which again lacks the immediacy of face-to-face therapy. We were very grateful to Pobble and the sustainability grant, which many charities received, because that allowed us to buy laptops for staff members, for example, and to put in place the technology that made it possible to deliver a service during the year. So in one way, it was the most challenging year, but in another way, we really overcame enormous difficulties and prioritised the very vulnerable client group that we work with. And we have hundreds of testimonies from clients saying how important that support was, particularly during the isolation and the anxiety of COVID and the lockdown. I'm just going to go through some of the stats from 2020. The annual report will be on the website as soon as this webinar finishes, so you can look at them in more detail in a second or after that. But just to highlight some of the, sorry. Okay, and ironically, this is a quotation from one of our clients saying, "My therapist and the room we work in is the only safe place in my life." But what we learned during COVID is that it's possible to create that safe, intimate space by working remotely. And in the survey we completed at the end of 2020, some of our clients, about 80% of our clients actually, said really they were longing for the possibility of coming back to face-to-face therapy. But about 20% of our clients said that actually they were happy to continue working remotely because it meant they didn't have to travel. And of course, online therapy means that we could broaden our reach, because people who couldn't come to Dublin from maybe the west of Ireland every week for a therapy session were now able to engage with a therapist. So it's very likely moving forward, we will continue to offer a hybrid model of therapy to try and match the needs and the desires of our clients. So if we look at the advocacy statistics for 2020, in total there were 430 clients, but last year we had 346 clients contacting us for the first time, compared to 86 clients whose engagement was ongoing. Now, our advocacy support team work with people in a more practical way than the psychotherapy team. They offer support in engaging with the criminal justice system, with civil actions, and very importantly, in supporting people and making notifications to TUSLA about child protection concerns. 58% of our clients, advocacy clients, were men, which often surprises people. And again, the increase is probably due to COVID, people sitting at home, thinking about what had happened and finally making a decision they wanted to do something, be it to seek justice for what happened to them through the criminal justice system, or indeed to address a concern they had about a child who was perhaps at risk of being abused by the person they were abused by, and deciding that they wanted to make a notification to child protection teams. If we look at the type of abuse that our advocacy clients experienced, the biggest grouping was where people who had been abused in their own families, and that's consistent right across our services. Now, interfamilial abuse is a very complex situation with very complex dynamics and very complex needs, and it requires very skilled facilitation in terms of supporting the survivor, but also acknowledging the ambivalence, maybe downright denial of family members. It's very common, for example, for people to be ostracized by their families who don't want to face the reality of what has happened. So our advocacy team, particularly down in the criminal courts, face situations where family members are supporting the complainant, the survivor, but other members are actually there in support of the alleged offender. So you can imagine how challenging that is for our advocacy team in those situations. And if we look at the reason people contacted us, now most people who contact us have actually multiple needs, in that we have people who want to engage with the criminal justice system, start by making a complaint to the Gardaí, for example, but who also want to make a child protection system. So these figures don't quite add up. Majority of the work our advocacy team do now is in relation to criminal justice support, supporting somebody as they make a complaint to the Gardaí, and for the first time in changes in legislation and protocol, a victim of a sexual crime is entitled to have a support person there while they make their statement to the Gardaí. Supporting the person right through the whole system when the case goes to the DPP's decision, and ultimately if the case goes to trial. Now, because of COVID, the courts shut down. And in March 2020, we had 12 people whose cases were due to take place in March, April, and maybe into May that year. And many other people whose cases were due to take place later on that year. The courts closed, so those people were left literally in limbo. Now, you can imagine the anxiety and stress that is there in waiting to attend a trial as a complainant witness, to give evidence, to be cross-examined. And for many people, their lives literally go on hold. Now, sadly, some of those cases did go ahead when the courts reopened in 2021, but many clients from that period are still waiting for trial dates into 2022 and maybe even into 2023. That is an issue that really, really needs to be addressed in terms of resourcing the entire criminal justice system. So there is not a long delay between the making of a complaint to the Gardaí and the finalisation of a trial. When we look at our psychotherapy programme, we met 74 people for an initial assessment. Essentially, how we try to work is that when somebody contacts us, we try within the first 3 weeks to meet them, to make an assessment with them as to whether this is the correct service for them. So, for example, if somebody's in full-blown addiction, we may need to make a referral to the addiction services. Or if somebody perhaps is living somewhere where they just can't access our service, we need maybe to refer them to somebody else. As of December 2020, there were 98 people on our waiting list. The demand for the service increased exponentially during the year. I mean, people told us that they were sitting at home, thinking about what had happened. All the normal activities and busyness of their life was taken away because of lockdown. They weren't going to work. They didn't have their normal social life, their games, the gym, family engagements, and so on. So people told us about really distressing symptoms, flashbacks, nightmares, panic attacks, very high suicide ideation. And this is very, very worrying indeed. Of the people we met for first assessment, 1 in 3 of them told us that at some stage in their lives, they had attempted suicide. So it is enormously concerning to us that we have people sitting on a waiting list. At the end of December last year, the waiting list was about 1.5 years. So sitting on a waiting list, and we had no idea, were they surviving? Had they made another suicide attempt? What was happening to them? Because after the first assessment, normally there's a waiting period before a therapist is available to engage them in longer term therapy. Now, we were delighted when TUSLA decided to fund an extra position for us, a new position, a waiting list case manager, and that person has taken up her role in 2021. So what she does is make sure that she's in contact with everybody on the waiting list, identify the people in crisis, identify the people with high suicide ideation, and is able to provide ongoing support, not therapeutically, but in a very supportive way, while the person is waiting for an appointment with a therapist. And as I say, we're very grateful to TUSLA for that. If we look at the psychotherapy statistics, you'll see that we had an increase. I mean, it was amazing that we were able to have an increase in 2020. And as again, you'll see that a huge percentage of people were dealing with intrafamilial abuse. Extrafamilial abuse included people like neighbours, professionals the child came in contact with, clergy, and so on and so forth. And of course, some people are abused multiple times, both in their family and externally. So child sexual abuse has an incredibly devastating impact on the growing child's psychological development and personality. And that impact persists right throughout the person's life. So people will tell us about incredibly low self-esteem, about an inherent and long-lasting sense of shame about themselves, about difficulties in relationship, about anxiety, depression, and so on. Child sexual abuse is a relational trauma. It happens in a relationship, be it with somebody in the child's family or somebody, another adult that they should be able to trust. I mean, we do meet people who have been abused by strangers, but that is a relatively small grouping for us. So while short-term therapy can deal with some of the symptoms, for example, can help somebody learn how to control panic attacks, it doesn't deal with that underlying complex sense of trauma and sense of utter shame about oneself that really contaminates a person's dealing in the world. So that is why we offer open-ended therapy, and the majority of our clients stay with us for 2 to 3 years. We often grapple with how can we, shorten that time so that we can take more people off the waiting list. But I mean, the type of therapy we offer is effective. People really do move on to live healthy and satisfying lives, and that cannot happen in, a very short 10 or 20 session model. In terms of the prevention program, we work with people who have sexually harmed children. The majority of the sex offenders are men. We've had a couple of women contact us who have sexually harmed children, and we would suspect that that is a total underrepresentation, because our clients tell us, about 67% of our clients do tell us they have been abused by a woman, a mother, a sister, an aunt, some other person they come into contact with. So when the COVID happened, we really worried about what would we do with these offenders. I mean, if we just stopped offering a service, would they be out there? Would they relapse? Would they, be a huge risk to children? And about 20% of our offenders are people who have offended online. They have downloaded absolutely obscene child sexual abuse images. And many of them have actually been caught by the Gardaí because they've been downloading. And we wondered, how could we put online offenders into online therapy? So we grappled with that, but we decided that we would have to take the risk. And with a great deal of preparation, we offered offenders with whom we already had been seeing in a face-to-face context that type of support. And we were actually very pleasantly surprised at the quality and the depth of the work we were able to do with those offenders. And you can see there the relationship of the offenders to the victims. Again, interfamilial, extrafamilial, and it's stranger, very small, and quite a number of people have abused both or more than one child. So that program is really important. Offenders travel from all over the country to this program. The program consists of usually about 10 sessions of assessment and preparation for group, and then a 2-year group program. So we have people coming from the west of Ireland, from the south of Ireland, from every corner of Ireland. And it is, again, a great concern for us that this type of program is not available, I would suggest, in every county in Ireland. We see this absolutely as a core child protection measure. If we are serious about interfering in the cycle of sexual abuse, we have to offer this to sex offenders. And our program has been very successful in that after their 2-year treatment, they go into 2 years aftercare, and the level of reoffending is really, really very low. So that perhaps is a call out for resourcing for these type of programs nationwide. So finally, increasingly, people who've been sexually abused in childhood do want to speak out publicly. We've become accustomed to seeing people outside the Central Criminal Courts, for example, talking about what has happened to them. And that's greatly to be valued, because the voice of survivors has huge power that people like, say, 1 in 4, the professionals working with abuse, just do not have. But on the other hand, the majority of our clients never, ever want to talk publicly about what has happened to them. And therefore, their voices are missing from the arenas and the venues where decisions are made about legislation, about processes and procedures in the statutory services that have a huge effect on them. So we see it as a huge part of our work to give voice to people, to survivors, and to represent them in those places. In 2020, the O'Malley Review of the Trial of Sexual Offences was published in August, and that made a huge range of recommendations which, if implemented, will certainly improve the experience of victims of sexual crimes in the criminal justice system. And we have worked very closely with the Department of Justice on various implementation committees with a view to putting those recommendations in place. It's happening slowly, but it's happening. And the idea that all those services have to be trauma informed is becoming accepted now in government circles. We have also been concerned for a number of years about the processing and the way child protection notifications to TUSLA are handled. TUSLA published a new child abuse substantiation procedure back in the end of 2019, I think. And we have quite a few concerns about how the retrospective allegations, the historic allegations that we make on behalf of our clients are being handled. We formed a network with all the services working with sexual violence and all the professional bodies who accredit psychotherapists. And we have been working hard and in consultation with TUSLA to address those concerns. But that outcome is still open and ongoing. Finally, I just want to say thank you to, about over 70% of our funding comes from statutory services, and we are extremely grateful to the HSE, to TUSLA, and to the Department of Justice for their ongoing and steadfast support over the years. We're really grateful, as David has said, to all our donors, corporate donors, private donors, and the supporters who during COVID ran zillions of online fundraising events for us. Our fundraising fell drastically because we had to cancel all our fundraising events for March. So really grateful to all the people who supported us in online fundraising. I cannot thank our board enough for the support they have shown us through this really, really difficult time. They have just been so available to us, so unstinting in giving of their expertise in various areas, and have been there for us every step of the way. So a huge thank you to David and to all the other directors of the board. And finally, I just want to say a thank you to our amazing staff. I would not have believed a year and a half ago that we could have pulled off what we have done in the last year and a half. And that is because our staff have been totally committed to putting the needs of our clients first. They have been adaptable and flexible in their working hours, working from home, working online. It's very difficult, especially for a psychotherapist and advocacy officers, to sit in the privacy of their home and have this very dark material coming into their private space without the boundary between the office and home. And people have absolutely managed that. And I just want to say an enormous thank you on behalf of myself and the management team to them. So I'd like now to hand over to Dr. Niall Muldoon, who David has already introduced to you. Dr. Niall Muldoon has been a great friend to 1&4 over the years, very supportive of our work, and we are delighted that he's agreed to launch our annual report this morning. So Niall, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Maeve. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I think just to start off, I really find this very important. The vision for 1&4 is an Irish society where children are safe from the threat of sexual harm. I think that really states the target for everybody, and it's a fantastic vision to have. I want to thank you, Maeve, for the invitation to launch this report today. And as you say, I've had a long-held connection with 1&4, and I hold the organisation in very high regard. I feel honoured to be able to play any role in highlighting your fantastic work, especially in a year like no other, when children's rights were low on the priority list as decisions were made, and when we know that many of our most vulnerable children were locked down within very dangerous and toxic settings. The work that you did is fantastic. Just again to make it real, I recently received a very angry and upsetting correspondence from someone who had experienced sexual abuse as a child and has never been able to get any justice, despite reporting it on a number of occasions and her file being sent to the DPP, but unfortunately it just was never prosecuted. She was demanding that I, as Ombudsman for Children, apologise on behalf of the government for what she had gone through and for the lack of justice in her case. I wrote back to her after reading it and just said that I could not apologise on behalf of the government, but I could apologise as a human being and an individual for the huge hurt that she had suffered and the immense trauma that it had left her with. In turn, she replied to me in a letter that really struck a chord and offers a powerful insight into the reality of what is often dismissed. I think by some people, they hear the term retrospective abuse or historic abuse and they think it's not that bad. The wounds will have healed. Something is lessened because it's years ago. You're an adult now, so it's not so bad. And I think we need to keep reminding people that's not the truth. I'm just going to give a quote here from Mary's letter. Mary's not her real name, but she's kind of allowed me to use this quote. And she said, the unfortunate thing is, when I look back on my childhood, the CSA is predominantly, the child sexual abuse is predominantly what comes back in my mind. I don't have much memory before those incidences. And that's what's sad and difficult about my adult life. We all should have that safe internal space we can go to that brings some peace to our lives, especially in difficult times. We all should have a childhood where we remember playing, learning, having fun, and feeling safe. And that just, to me, that sums up the pain, the hurt, the trauma, the difficult journey that any adult who suffered abuse as a child, who hasn't had it dealt with or catered for, goes through. It's that lack of a safe internal space, as she calls it. And that's why 1 in 4 is so important. So again, for me, I know that most of us assume that spending time in a family home is never anything but sunshine and rainbows, and we'd all love to see that being the case for every child. But we know from the increase in reports of domestic violence last year and the decrease in reports of abuse of children in 2020, COVID left many children exposed to dangers and traumas that may take years for us to understand. Thus, the fact that 1 in 4 continues to strive to bring its therapeutic program to more and more adults who suffered such hurt in the past, and the fact that they actually saw or offered therapy to 172 survivors versus 134 in 2019, that's worthy of celebration. It highlights the massive effort made by all of 1 in 4, and particularly the therapeutic team, to remain part of the lives of those who needed them during calamitous time when many of their other supports most likely fell away. And may have given an example there, and it was in the paper this morning too, of the person who never told anyone within their own home about the abuse they'd suffered, so they accessed therapy and support via their phone in the car park. And that, again, that just shows the absolutely invaluable aspect of the work for those people who literally have no one else to turn to. So the fact that 1 in 4 kept going was just massive and great credit. It's great too to see the advocacy service offered support to over 400 people last year, despite all the impediments that went with COVID. Their section of the report, for me, highlights the real difficulties visited upon someone looking to report a crime or to seek justice through our court system. And again, as Ombudsman for Children, I know children have huge difficulty in this, but it's no easier for adults. They give great credit to the efforts of all within the court service, the judiciary and the legal practitioners to try and reduce the waiting list through COVID-19. But as we all know, there was already long delays built into the system, and there were issues in courts before 2020. So this was just mercilessly compounded by COVID-19. And that's shown by the fact that COVID-19 or 1 in 4 only saw 3 clients reach trial basis during 2020. That leaves a very serious backlog now, and something which needs to be addressed by the Department of Justice, and may have touched on that. So I just want to commend all in the advocacy service for their fortitude and the empathic support to those client groups. It's so important at a crucial time in their journey, whether that's a criminal court, the family courts, child protection system. Having somebody to help them navigate those systems is fantastic. I also want to congratulate all who work within the fundraising and policy sections of 1 in 4, because they too provide enormous support to the survivors of sexual abuse, even if they do not see them face-to-face capacity. I know that 2020, and again, may have touched on it, was a really trying time for fundraising, and the determination that must have been shown is enormous. To be alive, still alive and kicking, is great credit to everybody in all the departments. Just a little bit more in relation to the prevention program. For many of you here, you won't know an awful lot about me, but may have said, and David said, that I worked previously with CARI between 2007 2012. I worked as Director of Clinical Services there, supporting children and families affected by sexual abuse. But my connection to 1 in 4, and we would have crossed paths then, but my connection goes back even further. I took my first full-time job as a psychologist in 1998, working with adults who had sexually abused children and also those who had suffered sexual abuse themselves as children. And it was an area of psychology that I never expected to find myself working in. Indeed, I was sure that I would absolutely not work in that area because I felt it would be too difficult. And also I wasn't sure the value of working with those who had visited the worst type of hurt on children. However, as my mother is fond of saying, when man plans, God smiles. So I never planned on working in that area, but God had other plans. And he says, not only will you work in that area, but you will love it. You will spend 10 years in it. You will do your PhD in it. Another thing that I hadn't planned on doing. And it will be a conduit for me to express my desire for justice for all children. Across that decade, I learned about the different facets of sexual abuse and the impact it had on so many people, not just the direct victim, but their families and communities. I also learned about the wonderful work of One in Four because while its founder, Colin O'Gorman, was suing the Pope and pushing the groundbreaking Ferns inquiry, we were working with many offenders from a religious background. Not only were we working with them, but we were also working with their families and constantly learning about the extent of harm done by child sexual abuse. The inspirational decision by the founders of the Granada Institute to always, from the very start, mix the therapeutic work between those who carried out sexual offences and those who were the subject of such abuse meant that I had to quickly learn the true meaning of being non-judgmental. If I was to truly understand the pain of someone who's sexually abused as a child, then I needed to be fully present to that pain and recognise how they were rationalising it, how they were living with it, so that I could help them to move to a new space, which we hoped would involve less pain and more calm, rather than chaos or anger or self-loathing. Similarly, if I was to help a person to stop their offending behaviour, I needed to suspend all my natural human judgments and allow that person to present their rationale and their understanding of what happened and how it came to be. By suspending judgment and trying to follow their logic and understanding that they had, we were able to create numerous opportunities to point out flaws in that logic and suggest challenges to the mindset which led to their abuse. This was true child protection work. Stopping someone who we knew has carried out child sexual abuse from doing it again is a massive protective factor for society. The concept of working with both sides of a dispute is not new. There's a whole industry of mediators all around the world doing that in business settings, as well as political and armed conflict settings. As a Donegal man who grew up along the border during the Troubles, I'll always be grateful to people like John Hume, Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair for finding a way to listen to so many viewpoints and help to bring the divergent parties together to create the Good Friday Agreement. Being able to hold both sides of a toxic and dangerous relationship is extremely difficult, but it's also necessary if change is to occur in such relationships. Therefore, the work that One in Four has done in supporting and advocating for the voice of those who have survived horrific abuse over the years can never be praised enough. They have been warriors in carrying the fight to the government and the public to firstly recognise the scale of the problem and then push for the services to offer therapy and offer supports to those people most affected by such abuse. The work they're doing around adults who have acknowledged sexual offending is also trailblazing, and their prevention group numbers 64 individuals receiving over 500 hours of therapy in 2020. It's not a huge number, but if each of these 64 people are helped to avoid repeating their abuse on one child, then this service will have contributed to so much to the well-being of our society. However, I know from talking with One in 14 that there are many more people out there who are crying out for such help, but the funding does not allow for the level of expansion that's required. I know from my work history that it's hard for many in society to accept that working with adults who have sexually offended is a positive thing. But logic dictates that if 1/4 of all children experience sexual abuse, then there has to be a lot of teens and adults who are carrying it out. Currently, however, the most likely place for any of those who have offended to get help to change is within the prison or the court systems. And that's simply not enough, because very many of those who offend are both eager to change, but don't know how, and are unlikely to ever be charged or brought to the attention of the Gardaí. Thus, One in Four's prevention programme needs to be funded to a sufficient level to offer strong child protection by increasing their availability to the adults who want to acknowledge their wrongdoing and to change. This is particularly important for those who offend at a young age, and we know approximately 1/3 of all abuse is carried out by those in their mid to late teens. Therefore, if you can work with 18 to 25-year-olds to prevent reoffending across their lifetime, then you can offer a massive assurance to society child abuse is being taken seriously and we are working hard to prevent it. Just now, as I come to the conclusion of my talk, I want to remind everyone of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which Ireland ratified almost 30 years ago. It states within Article 19, which provides for the protection from abuse and neglect for all children. It says, state parties shall take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, and educational measures to protect the child from all forms of physical or mental violence, injury or abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, maltreatment or exploitation, including sexual abuse, while in the care of parents, legal guardians, or any other person who has the care of the child. I would suggest that we as a state still have more to do in ensuring the rights of our children to protection from abuse and neglect. But at least with 1 in 4 working hard, we have a champion who is helping to minimise the trauma of such abuse and neglect. Congratulations again to all of the staff in 1 in 4, and thank you to Maeve and the management team and board of directors for keeping everything going in the most dire of circumstances last year. I am delighted to officially launch the 2020 annual report for 1 in 4. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Niall. That was fantastic and very heartfelt. So very much appreciate you taking the time to come to us this morning and to share your thoughts with the broader community. As a reminder, if anybody does have any questions they would like to ask, do feel free to drop it into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to again thank everybody for joining today. As Maeve said, the annual report will be on the 1 in 4 website as soon as this presentation is over. We do look forward to engaging with everybody, all of our stakeholders over the next 12 months. We really do value your support, and having come through 2020, we look forward to 21 closing out and moving into 22, where we hope to continue to make progress in what is such an important issue for society, and particularly Irish society, to bear. So thank you once again. I don't see any questions at the moment, so I'm happy to draw the meeting to a close and look forward to talking to everybody soon. So thank you very much once again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.